Next, the story develops in Mike's apartment. Katie cut the potatoes and thought about it. She thought about making something so delicious for dinner. Mike was in the kitchen. He also helped her cut vegetables. Katie walked up to him and said, "Mike, why don't you get another knife? Because this knife is the best." Mike answered. Katie continued talking to Mike in the kitchen. Katie says, "But I heard that it was used before as a relic for human sacrifices." Katie immediately remembered and imagined this picture before her eyes. It was, of course, a terrible sight. She immediately felt scared. Mike turned to face Katie. He was holding in his hands a large, sharp knife with a purple blade. "Katie, my friend, don't worry. I can easily neutralize him with my magic." He smiled and said, "Mike, so clear. It's clear," Katie said. She didn't quite like this answer. In the living room, Police Inspector Johnny was sitting on the sofa. He carefully watched what was shown on TV. They said the following on TV. "Let's move on to the next news from the entertainment industry. Actress Elf, Miss Rent." Zarafi was chosen as the Xmas Muse and is currently finishing filming a perfume commercial. She presents a new fragrance with the scent of an elf's body. Police Inspector Johnny sat attentively and listened to all this. He was slightly shocked by this news. These people almost went crazy. She grabbed her hair with both hands. She really liked the smell of this perfume with the scent of Alpha's body. Katie sat down on the sofa next to the police inspector. She turned her head towards where Mike was standing in the kitchen. "Mike, I actually like this smell. I had never imagined that elves smelled so fragrant." Katie said. At this point, Katie asked, "That's what I thought, Mike." "Please tell me why you don't smell like that." I asked Mike these questions. Mike froze and didn't know what to tell her. "You're an elf in the prime of your life, or am I wrong?" Katie said. "Well, it won't feel much if you're only 1/4 elf," Mike answered. So, our action is again transferred to a beautiful, tall glass building. It says Jenkinson in big letters. The building was so tall that it seemed to reach the sky. White clouds floated beautifully across the sky. Blair stood in the CEO's office. She bent her elbows and crossed her arms over her chest. She was wearing glasses. "Listen to me, Mike," Blair said. Mike sat down on the sofa and carefully watched and listened to her. "Something happened, say. If I came here, it means I'm ready to negotiate," said Mike. Then Blair adjusted her glasses with her hand. "The case of the disappearance of Chairman Chan, which was assigned to you. So, here it is. Chairman Jenkinson was very interested in him," the elf said. Mike continued to sit on the couch and listen carefully to what the elf was saying, after being told in a speech the identity of the arrested HS member. Mike began to tell me in great detail. Then I was told to contact the agent who was assigned this case. A serious conversation ensued in the office. It was a conversation between two professionals. The elf continued to ask, "What do you think, Mike? Who is that dragon? Who hired a member of a criminal organization? What is your answer to Agent Mike?" the elf asked loudly. The chief secretary of the corporation took the control panel in her hands. She turned on the large screen that was in this office. "We believe that these three are the main suspects," the elf said. "These are Halispade, Vitravia, and Edeline," said the elf. "That's what I thought," Mike said to himself. He looked attentively at the screen. "But I still can't understand. Why did the chairman do this, and why did he want to see me?" He didn't have an answer to this question yet. The chief secretary of the corporation stood and looked at Mike with a serious face. "Please, tell me everything you know about Hassan Industry," the chief secretary asked. "I thought it was a pharmaceutical company," said Mike. "This is true for everyone. However, Hassan Industry, which is led by Chairman Gaijun, has a secret mission," the chief secretary answered. "But this is a business. Obviously, they do these things," Mike answered. "But there is a problem with their research," the secretary said indignantly. "Mike, the fact is that they were doing dangerous research." Mike moved to a chair. He looked carefully at the secretary and listened to everything she said. Mike realized that the research was about the genetics of the dragon family. Everything is clear. Dragons are immune to all poisons that exist. They are strong, so it is therefore possible that they are interested in them. However, dragons are too proud to allow research to be carried out on themselves. Possibly the one who attacked Taejun. This is a dragon embittered by research, and this dragon was very proud of his noble dragon family. Chief Secretary, I don't understand something. So you think Little Dragon did it? As far as I know, Jenkinson has always sought attention. So, I don't think he would risk his reputation, said Mike. The conversation began to take place in a raised voice. What makes you think that Chairman Taejun is an alien? Said Mike. Yes, but we have no proof, she answered harshly. Chief Secretary of the corporation. The chief secretary approached the screen and began to show the t-shirt. On the screen was a complete diagram of the disappearance of the director of Hassan Industry. And then, I built a campaign. We are very suspicious of his sudden success, the chief secretary said. Mike sat and showed everything he had on the screen. Taejun is an alien. The government and immigration bureau have known about this for a long time, said Mike. But they will clearly deny it, because that's the best case scenario for them. This interesting information was displayed on the entire screen. Director, Hassan Industry, Kim In-ju. She's still doing that dangerous research. The investigation will end when Taejun goes missing, the chief secretary said. A very large photograph of the director appeared on the screen. With her strength, she can cover any traces. Trust me, Mike. Jenkinson, the corporation's chief secretary, said. Mike began to carefully examine the photograph and all the data that the chief secretary of the corporation provided her. He loved to talk quietly to himself. I want to say that she is also a rather suspicious person, said Mike. In Sunni, in the photo we see Kim and Chan. Is Kim Young-ju Mi devoted to Chan Taejun? Why did she do this? The chief secretary of the corporation kept asking Mike. There's only one thing I don't understand. Why doesn't she leak all the information she has on him? I think this is the best and fastest way to make money from this. The corporation's chief secretary adjusted her glasses, and she continued talking. Mike, what do you think of this option? What if she wants to take his place? Why not? A good option. The main sector continued to speak. That's why she killed her boss. That's all. I thought she could get away with it, but no. Regardless, this matter is being investigated, the chief secretary said. The series is, of course, a very interesting story. But wait. In fact, now we are talking about something else. Don't you realize there are dragons involved? Said Mike, although there is probably a matchmaker. Mike thought very quietly to himself. My God, how I don't like working. Mike repeated several times. I wish I could stand in the park now, listen to the birds singing, watch the children play. Eventually, I would lie on my back and look at the sky and the sun. This is wonderful. I should have given up on all this in the first place, said Mike. Mike collected his thoughts in fear and began to speak again. Sorry, but I should have said it in the first place. This is as expected. If you are a little in doubt, then you should read this letter. Michael took out the letter and handed it to him, to his chief secretary. The chief secretary tilted her head and looked at this letter. This interested her. Mike, I suggest we do this right now. Why waste time? The chief secretary said. Damn, that wasn't my plan, said Mike. He gave the letter to the girl. Now I understand that I don't have a chance. Mike thought. Thanks, I'll read it, the chief secretary said. After this conversation, Mike went down to the street. Inspector Johnny was already waiting for him there. They got into a white police car and drove off. They went to the office where Director Hassan is. Police Inspector Johnny and Mike drove up to the large office where the president was. It was a beautiful skyscraper. They walked together towards the front entrance. Mike and Inspector Johnny were invited into the meeting room. The director wasn't there yet. They were offered sweets and drinks so they wouldn't get bored. I wonder how long we will wait for her, said Mike. People came into the office. They were men and women. The first to enter was a woman in a beautiful, formal business suit. "Good afternoon. Sorry for being late," she said. It was Kim Youngju. "Director Hassan." "My God, she is magnificent," said the police inspector. He stood up from his chair and began to say hello. "Good afternoon, madam. My name is Johnny. I'm a police inspector," he said. Mike, as always, was thoughtful. He looked at Director Hassan and thought. This scent, I've heard it somewhere before, Mike thought. The police inspector, Mike, and the director sat down at the negotiating table. This familiar feeling did not leave my mind. T-shirt. "I need you to remember a few things," said Police Inspector Johnny. "I will only speak to the human police," said Director Hassan. Mike looked at the director carefully. He paid attention to every little detail. The first thing he didn't like was that this woman said very strange things. "I am now in such a state that by cheating it is easy to drain all my energy," the director thought. Suddenly, Director Hassan stood up from the table. "Let's leave it at that. Sorry, I'm very tired." Director Kim Youngju said. Mike crossed his arms over his chest. "I heard another manager is missing," Mike said. "But for some reason you didn't say anything about it. It was never even mentioned." The director stood and continued to communicate. Perhaps he just left and is not in touch. Director Kim Youngju said. Everything that Director Mike said was quickly analyzed in his head. Mike turned to the director. "Director Kim Youngju, I have a unique ability. Director, perhaps you have heard the word MPF?" Mike asked. The director thought about it. MPF is an interspecific sex pheromone. This is an unexplained biological mystery. Mutants capable of spreading a pheromone that attracts other species are called MPF developers. Mike thought. Director of the Ministry of Health. "Since when have you had such a relationship with the dragon?" Mike asked. The director stood there and didn't know what to answer. Mike continued. "Usually the MPF is released only upon frequent contact with the species," said Mike. "Jackinson and I had concerns. We considered those three as prime suspects. The dragon, which could be associated with Kim Youngju, is a developer, Kinor Wakini." Mike listened carefully to the director. "It's none other than him," said Mike. "When did you start being friends with Edelins?" Mike asked. But the director simply turned around and silently left. Police Inspector Johnny and Mike came down where their car was parked. They sat in it and began to communicate. "I can't believe she just got up and left without answering." "I was outraged, Mike." "Yes, this is indeed very strange," said the police inspector. "By the way, Mike, tell me how you figured out the dragon," Inspector Johnny asked. Suddenly the frying pan spoke. "Sorry. Since you are heading to Hassan Industry, I want to tell you something. I can't restrain myself any longer," the frying pan said. Mike and Johnny sat in the car and listened. The frying pan continued to talk. "I just thought I knew the one you were talking about," she said. "You know?" Mike asked. "Yes. This is Yeonju. She often came to the owner's house. Then she started coming once a week to spend the night." The frying pan said. At this moment, the director was talking on the phone. "Why didn't you say anything? What are you going to do now? How have you still not been able to find one person? We must, at the cost of our lives, find him faster than the orcs. Is it a dragon that he can't even summon spirits?" "Idiot!" the director shouted into the phone. "I wiretapped my office, so I know everything and heard everything," Mike said to the inspector. "I'm doing everything I can. Do you even realize how many elves were looking for Chantajan?" said Mike. Mike began to remember that stent on the wall on which the photographs were hung. Quite recently, there was a case of a missing elf. Mike said to the inspector, "You cops and orcs blame them for being useless. You cops and orcs blame them for being useless. But one today became very useful." Mike said to the inspector, "I'll tell you an interesting story now. An old elf with very unusual abilities is currently hiding in the bookstore." Mike told the story. Mike had a very serious face. "I came there to catch this interesting creature." Mike continued talking. "I always want to be one step ahead of events. Of course, this doesn't always work out, but I try really hard," said Mike. At this moment in the doorway of the bookstore, a slender girl appeared. She was talking on the phone. Yes, I came. I found this place. I see him. A girl spoke on the phone. A baby orc came out to meet the girl with a box in his hands. Oh, we have a new client. Welcome to our store, said the baby orc. The kid with big eyes stood and looked at this girl. It was not his first time seeing this in the area. Mike, through his wiretap, heard what was happening in the bookstore. He heard the description of this girl. He heard what she was talking about on the phone. His face was very worried. Mike needs to go urgently. Let's go, Police Inspector Johnny said loudly. No, wait a little. Johnny? Mike answered. Give me 1 minute to think. Mike continued. Mike began to reason. If we drive 10 kilometers through all the Seoul traffic jams, but when we arrive, it will be too late. So, Inspector Johnny, listen to me carefully, said Mike. Okay, Mike, I'm listening, Johnny answered. Mike began to use his dark magic. Everything around began to turn red with red smoke. It's warp magic, Mike said. As soon as I move completely, you will immediately head to Hassan, said Mike. Micro cut his palm once again. Blood was coming out of his hand, and immediately dark magic began to work. Johnny, you have to keep Yeonju safe. And at this time, I will resolve some issues, said Mike. Just lock her up somewhere until I contact you, said Mike. Because if something goes wrong, we can use her as a hostage. The police inspector began to worry and worry. Hostage? Johnny asked. Tell me quickly who you are planning to blackmail. Johnny continued. Of course, the dragon said Mike. At this time, a tall girl in heels entered the bookstore. She had short hair and was wearing a jacket and jeans. She kept her hands in her pockets. Hello, elf, the girl said. The elf was sitting on the floor in the lotus position. He was reading a book and meditating. Peace and tranquility spread throughout his entire body. I'm telling you, hello, elf, and you are silent in response. It's rude of you, the girl said. Call the spirit better, she said. The bookstore boss closed his book. He continued to remain calm. The elf sat on the floor in the lotus position and continued to meditate. For the spiritualist, perfume, said the elf, his alter ego and like-minded person. I will never summon one of them next to someone I don't trust, the elf said confidently. The girl resisted and listened carefully to everything he said. So, elf, let's express our thoughts more simply, the girl shouted at the elf. Let's take it easy and without any of your nonsense. The girl continued. Find me this freak! As quickly as possible, the girl said and threw a printout with a photograph and a dossier of the missing person on the elf's table. Didn't you understand my words? The elf answered. The girl became furious. Her eyes became very big. They glowed. The pupils glowed blue. Na opened her mouth wide. Her fangs looked like the fangs of a vampire. The girl began to take the form of a demon. She grew up and turned into a giant. The girl laughed very loudly and terribly. This is an insignificant creature, the girl screamed. It was already evening outside. It was quiet and calm. The entire bookstore was illuminated with blue light. The light was so strong that it illuminated the roadway near the bookstore. It was a roar filled with the magical power of a dragon. It literally shakes the body and mind. This spectacle is certainly not for the faint of heart. Blue smoke enveloped the baby. The baby screamed and remembered Mike's words. If strange, evil people appear in the store, which will frighten you and hurt you, then the huge explosion of the black book will save you. The kid ran to pull out the book carefully with his right hand from the shelf. He was not tall enough. He stood on his toes and reached for the book. When you get it, a staircase will open for you. Just go down it. I remembered the words, baby. At that moment, the girl grabbed the elf's throat with her left hand. She was so strong that she managed to lift it up with one hand and hold it. So where do we start? The girl shouted. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the girl turned to the side. With one left outstretched hand, she continued to hold the elf high. The entire bookstore was illuminated with a bright, white and yellow fiery light. There was a very big explosion. Flames engulfed the entire store. It was a cactus that was sitting in a large brown pot that exploded. Mike recently brought it to the bookstore. The cactus was not easy. It was a trap for unexpected and uninvited guests. The explosion was so large that flames flew out through the windows onto the roadway. The entire street was lit with fire. There was a deafening, explosive bang. The boss of the bookstore approached the little orc. "Baby, let's quickly go to the second floor," said the elf. "Yes, sir." "Okay," answered the little orc. There was a lot of smoke in the lower bench. It was a good job the kid did. The stunned girl sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. She had practically no strength. "Enter, you freaks," the girl said, very evilly. The girl began to rise a little to her knees. She had wild eyes and a very angry appearance. There was a lot of smoke around her after the explosion. "I'll tear them to pieces." "Very angry," the girl said. She tried to get up and fell to her knees again. There was practically no strength. Most likely she was concussed from the explosion. She didn't understand what was happening. The whole sky turned red and black. Among all this, the body began to be clearly visible. It turned out to be Mike. He was flying across the sky. To help your friends. This was his dark magic working. The girl raised her head up. She smiled hysterically. The girl saw Mike high in the sky. "So you're the boss here?" The girl laughed and asked. Mike hovered in the sky and looked at her. The girl from the ground looked into the sky at Mike. Mike was simply silent. "Are you completely deaf?" The girl screamed loudly. Mike landed and stood on the roof of the house. A wind-colored red and black blew behind him. "I'm not deaf at all," Mike answered loudly. Mike's eyes glowed with red, bright fire. He was furious. Because Mike began to remember who this girl was. He definitely knew her. Mike began to shout loudly from the roof of the house down. "You are Edelyn's. You are 64 years old. 6 years ago, you received temporary citizenship." And then she moved to the ground. "There was no way for you to obtain official citizenship," Mike continued. "This is all due to measurement problems. You don't even know who I shouted, Mike." "How did you find out all this?" the girl screamed. "If you are so brave, come down to me. Let's talk." The girl was very angry, very angry. She was just furious. "You are obviously unfamiliar with the customs of dragons," said Mike. "Don't want to show your real face? I'm sure the elder dragon will like the troublesome cretin," said Mike. The girl did not expect such a turn of events. She didn't expect Mike to know everything about her. On the street behind her, city residents began to gather. These were ordinary onlookers who were interested when something incomprehensible was happening in the city. "Follow me. I know a place." He said, "Mike is on top." The girl raised her head up to the sky. The sky was gray and red. Mike's magic was all over the sky. "I'll make you regret this," the girl thought, and went after Mike. They flew into the forest. It was already deep night. Mike sat and talked to her. "I take it that the elders are clearly intimidating you?" "Told you, Mike. Since you were so scared and followed me, I just had to start talking about them." The girl stood. The girl stood and scratched the back of her head with her hand. "I get the impression that you have led me into a trap," the girl said. The girl's face suddenly began to change. Her eyes began to glow with white light. The teeth began to change. "You know, Mike, now you will definitely come to an end." The girl screamed loudly. A large explosion was heard from the place where the girl stood. A large, wide, bright beam flew straight into the sky. The whole forest and the whole sky broadcast its light. The girl began to turn into a huge dragon. The dragon's head and mouth alone were 10 times larger than Mike himself. The dragon opened its mouth and growled loudly at Mike. Mike just stood there and kept his hands in his pockets. The dragon flapped its wings so hard that the trees shook in different directions. Earth, sand, and stones flew up to the sky. The forest became dark and there was a lot of dust. The dragon began to fly over the forest. Mike jumped over the trees, took off, and was also in control of the situation. He had everything under his control. How much water has flown under the bridge since my last dragon hunt? Mike thought. Mike looked at his hand. Damn it, my arm is recovering too slowly. Mike said to himself, amazing magic. Deformation costs a lot. It takes almost all your strength. Mike accelerated and jumped on the dragon. With his sharp knife, he cut heavily on his arm. A large stream of black liquid gushed out from the wound site. Mike was flying through the sky. From the wound, black blood oozed out in a large stream. Then it turned purple. He directed this entire flow towards the dragon, to Mike very quickly with all his might. The dragon opened its mouth and roared loudly. It was creepy and scary. Mike was still high in the sky. The place where he cut his hand was invisible. Black and purple liquid oozed from there in a large stream. Mike got very angry. He pointed his cut left hand forward towards the dragon. He turned on all his energy, all his power. I used my dark magic. Mike looked at the dragon as it flew towards him. Then Michael shouted very loudly, "You will pay for all the mess you caused on my territory." The dragon did, and flew a circle around Mike. Then the dragon turned around and flew towards Mike to attack. A fight ensued. Mike hit the dragon's mouth with all his might. The dragon's teeth closed. It seemed as if they were just about to spill out of its mouth. The deacon felt severe pain. Most importantly, he did not understand what was happening. How did this even happen? Because the dragon was tens of times larger than Mike. Mike quickly flew around the dragon and kicked it again right in the jaw. He delivered his blows one after another. It was so fast that the dragon did not have time to react. White and blue light emanated from Mike. This was his dark magic working. "Don't expect mercy from me, even if you are a dragon. Shout out loud, Mike." Mike directed all his rays of light directly into the dragon's body. Everything sparkled and sparkled. The sky lit up white and blue. It seemed like there was going to be an explosion. How can a person move so fast? Thought the dragon. Meanwhile, Mike continued to circle the dragon from all sides and deliver his insidious blows. Suddenly, the dragon's eyes began to glow with a bright white light. It was clear that the dragon was very angry. "Then I will also use my magic," the dragon shouted. The dragon opened its mouth strongly and began to spew out not fire, but something else. It was like a strong current of wind and air. It was dragon's breath. Mike looked at the dragon and shouted loudly, "Is this dragon's breath? Right here? Have you gone completely crazy or what?" he shouted to the dragon. The dragon continued to spew out this dragon wind. This wind turned into blue flames of fire. "Do you want to set the whole forest on fire with your breath?" Mike asked loudly. Mike quickly began to think and reflect. And from the 6 dragon brains, thinking and magic, only the hind brain is responsible for balance in the dragon. "You need to aim right there," Mike thought. "I will aim for the hind brain and thereby cause earthquakes." Mike said out loud and directed all his blue and white energy to the ground. There was a small explosion. The blast wave turned everything on the ground upside down. There was also a dragon lying on the ground. "Hooray! It worked!" Mike shouted. Mike flew closer to the dragon. So, the outer layer covering the entire body of the dragon. "He is now very weak due to the concussion," said Mike. Mike took his sharpest magic knife. He waved it around him very quickly. The knife seemed to cut the air and left behind a multicolored trail of blue, white, and black. Mike stabbed the dragon with his sharp knife. A bright white and purple light began to erupt from Mike's knife. Mike decided to put a curse on this dragon. The dragon didn't expect this. In pain, the dragon opened its mouth and screamed loudly throughout the forest. His tongue practically flew out of his mouth. Mike stood near the dragon and looked at it. In his hands, he had that same sharp magic knife. It was night in the forest and almost nothing was visible. From the hole that Mike made in the dragon with his knife, a bright white and red light began to emerge. These rays were very bright, as if something was burning inside the dragon. "This is a blind spot where paraplegia can be caused," said Mike. "It's right here." "No, I don't want to die," the dragon cried. But Mike struck. "If you are a stupid and weak creature, but you don't deserve to live at all, I hope you understand me," said Mike. The dragon began calling Mike different names. It was even insulting. "How dare you say that? You're a dragon," said Mike. Mike's eyes glowed red. He was very determined. With his left hand, he confidently held his magical magic knife. "I told you that's enough," Mike shouted and struck another blow with his sharp knife into the dragon's body. "This therapy is for you, from me," said Mike to the dragon. Then Mike saw the clouds begin to dissipate in the sky. The white moon was very clearly visible. Mike stood and looked at her. A voice came from the sky. "Think carefully. I'd like you to stop there." Mike's voice spoke. This voice, Michael, was very familiar. It turns out that he is always being watched from above. At this moment, he was also being watched. Mike raised his head up and looked at the sky. "I'm afraid I won't be able to stop," said Mike. Jenkinson was watching Mike all this time. It was a slender man in a shirt and vest. He had blonde hair. He constantly watched Mike through his screen. "This thing has invaded my territory," Mike said. "I understand," Jenkinson said. "Then don't stop me." "It's a race problem. I have no choice," Mike said. "Mike, don't make me be any more petty than I already am," the man said. "Should I remember the Dragon Code?" Mike spoke. "The Draconic Code supersedes the laws of mortals. It says that only a dragon can kill another dragon. To violate it means to declare war on all dragons. It must be hard being a dragon, especially one like the chairman," Mike said. "Min-jun, let's be honest, is no one listening to you?" "Told you, Mike. This would never have happened if you had done your job properly," screamed loudly Mike. Mike walked up to the dragon and placed his foot on it. He held his knife in his hand. "Should I remember the Dragon Code?" Mike said out loud. "It's my business. I'm just dealing with whoever dared to touch mine." The voice came from above again. "Mike, I ask you to listen to me. You're like an old friend. Please, Mike, just listen to me. It still won't stop my anger," said Mike. "Shouldn't we just take care of it?" "I plan to just take some blood from this thing," said Mike. At this moment, the dragon was simply lying on the ground. Of course, this may shorten her life a little, but still, she is better off dead. Mike continued talking. "Do you have this option?" Mike asked. "Okay, my old friend. I understood you perfectly. Okay, now I'll send a team of orderlies to you. It will be there. Don't go anywhere," Jenkinson said. Mike sat on the dragon's tail and waited for a team of paramedics. Soon, orderlies appeared in the forest. They were dressed in wetsuits, helmets, and masks. One orderly came up to Mike and said, "Good job, Agent Mike." Mike looked up and saw a large number of orderlies ahead of him. There were definitely more than 10 of them. They were all wearing yellow suits. "Don't worry, we'll take care of the consequences," the orderlies said. The orderlies used an excavator to dig a hole. Internal organs, lymph, and skin are very valuable, but their sale is prohibited by law. The Bureau will take all the remains after this battle for itself, not leaving a single drop. Mike stood and thought. He stood there and thought that the body parts alone would cost several million. But these are just trifles compared to their blood. May continued to look at the sky and think. Replenishments began to arrive in his account. "For this case and work, I received half of my entire balance." Mike thought, "Dasmaturu pran." At that moment, Police Inspector Johnny called Agent Mike. "May, how are you doing there?" "Is everything okay?" Johnny asked. "I'm fine," Mike answered. "How is Kim Youngju?" "I tied her up just like you asked," the police inspector answered. "Listen, Johnny. Can you send me your address?" Mike said on the phone. "I think it's time to put an end to all this," Mike said in a serious voice. Mike flew to the address that Inspector Johnny gave him. It was a big room. In the middle of this room, there was a chair, and Kim sat tied up on it. The police inspector and Mike stood next to her and looked at her. Kim said, "Telephone recording evidence will not help you." "Don't worry about it, Kim," said Mike. "I'll get all the confessions I need from you anyway." "Mike, what are you up to?" Johnny asked. "My little beetle will again help me figure out everything that is in her head." The only question was, where did he get so much blood from? Mike quickly turned to the police inspector, Chairman Jang Taijun. He said loudly, "Like, where are his other houses? Except which is in Hanadan," said Mike. However, the police inspector quickly ran and got into the car. The police inspector began to talk along the way. There is a tall mixed-use building on the outskirts of the city, a small house in a picturesque location near a lake. There is also a villa in Gachon. The police inspector spoke. Mike was sitting in the back seat. He took his phone and began to urgently call. He called the office. You wanted to contact the chairman very urgently. An employee picked up the phone in the office. Elf. "Good afternoon, Mike," she replied. "Today I take calls instead of the chairman," the employee answered. Mike got very angry. "Get me the chairman very quickly." "Understood," said Mike. "I don't care what he's doing there now. I need to talk to him urgently." Mike continued. "This is all about the illegal immigrant," the employee said. "Who has a common ancestor with him," she said on the phone. Evening came. Mike and the police inspector were driving along the seacoast. They would have been a beautiful yellow and red sunset. The The sea surf was noisy. They arrived at a house that was on the seashore. I went to meet them. Passenger car. The car drove up to the mic. Stopped, the door opened, and someone began to get out. A handsome young man got out of the car, with white hair. This is Jenkinson's fire dragon. He is the chairman of the Jenkinson Company. He is an elder dragon. If only I had known that I would have to meet him like this. Mike thought I would then go with him. Mike and Jenkinson. Let's go for a walk along the embankment. They needed to communicate just the two of them without unnecessary ears. Why did only Jang Tae-jun disappear in the middle of the study? And he used a valuable homunculus as a dummy body for suicide. They continued talking. They walked towards the sitting fishermen. They were coming forward. They asked each other questions and answered them. The answer is very simple. Because all the research has already been completed. They approached the fishermen. They continued asking questions, pumping out liters of your own blood. Did you set everything up, Mr. Chan Tae-jun? Mike asked loudly. A race capable of pumping out liters of its own blood. This fisherman began to speak out loud. This can only mean one thing, he continued to say. The fisherman stood up and took off his hat. Pumping out many liters of his own blood only means one thing, that Chan Tae-jun is not human. You are not the clients I was waiting for, said the fisherman. It was Chan Tae-jun, chairman of Hassan Industries. He is not a man, but a dragon. The sun was slowly setting below the horizon. A man stood talking on the sea embankment. Mr. Chan Tae-jun. You should be aware that the Immigration Bureau has already searched your home. I understand that you used Kim Youngju's MPF to create a virus. The one that penetrates the immune system of dragons leads to their death. Virus? Asked the dragon. He looked down and thought. He knew a lot. I didn't want to say everything right away. Yes, this is the only virus that can penetrate the dragon's body. And the dragon's body is unkillable. There is no analog to such a virus in the whole world. The sea has calmed down a little. The sun had almost set below the horizon. The research is not yet completed. They continued talking. Yes, I had very little time. Even if it is unsuccessful, this attempt is still considered a crime, said Mike. And it is very serious. And it cannot be disputed, even if we all recognize you as mentally ill. The dragon sat down and lowered his head down. You probably wanted to say mentally ill? Tell it like it is, Mike, the dragon said in a sad voice. Do you all really think I'm crazy? The dragon began to be indignant and ask questions. I did all this out of good intentions, one might say, for the good. It had to be completely. Another thing, it must be a breakthrough, for example. I don't think so at all. I don't think you're crazy, said Mike. Who would create a virus that kills dragons? Mike continued. The dragon looked at Mike. His eyes glowed with violet light. The dragon began to speak very slowly. Or maybe I just hate dragons. Have you thought about this? I thought about this for a long time and came to this conclusion. Dragons are destructive pests. The social ecosystem in all its layers. It's all the trouble from them, said the dragon. Mike stood listening carefully to everything the dragon said. There are such personalities, even among people, Mike thought. And there are those who argue that the earth could have been saved. If only all people would just take it and disappear. But even people don't kill each other to reduce their population. The dragon spoke. That would be complete madness, said the dragon. Mike listened carefully. The dragon really spoke the truth. Dragon? I think you've already gone crazy, Mike said. The dragon sat down and began to speak. Think about it. Dragons are bad. Dragons are the rot of society. And it doesn't matter how everyone defends against them. The dragons will subjugate everyone anyway. Other races are like colorful paints. Eventually they will mix together, among themselves. But dragons are like oil. They always rise above the water. The dragon continued to speak to Jenkinson. Dragons suppress and dominate other races, polluting society. Am I wrong, Jenkinson? Asked the dragon. Tae-jun, I am not interested in your absolutely inadequate thoughts and speculations. Jenkinson said he was very dissatisfied with listening to all this that the dragon was saying. Mike held his magical sharp knife behind his back. Mr. Chan Tae-jun, please tell me, do you have earthly citizenship? Agent Mike asked. Mike took his knife with both hands. Or can you provide me with your residence permit, allowing you to legally be on Earth? Agent Mike asked. The dragon was silent for a very long time. Then he raised his eyes a little and answered, I don't have any of the above. Unfortunately, I have none of this. Once again, said the dragon. May turns on her dark magic. Once again, he cut his palm and blood flowed in a strong stream and carried on the wind. I knew it, Mike shouted. The entire coast, the entire sea, and all the buildings were illuminated in white and blue light. There was magic all along the coast. A very strong wind began to rise and blow. It was a very strong hurricane wind. Jenkinson, why are you standing around and doing nothing? Mike asked loudly. I just don't want to fight with my species. It's pointless. Jenkinson said. The wind died down a little. Jenkinson took off his tie and held it in his hand. He looked at the dragon. Who were you waiting for here? Jenkinson asked. The dragon was simply silent. He turned away from them. He just silently decided to continue doing his job and sit quietly and fish. Jenkins Nan was very annoyed and hurt by this. So, then it will be so, since you refuse to answer and remain silent. Then I have no other choice. Jenkinson said, suddenly, the sky and sea connected with a large, bright, fiery ray. It was clear what Jenkins began to include in his magic. He began to transform. He was very angry. Everything around went dark. It began to rain heavily. The water began to recede from the shore. Mike just stood there silently and kept his hands in his pockets. He understood what was about to happen. A huge, powerful dragon appeared in front of him. This dragon's eyes burned with fire. Drops of water that fell on the dragon's skin immediately hissed and dried, causing steam to escape into the air. This dragon had the longest wings. Agent Mike had never seen dragons like these before. He was especially impressed by the powerful front and hind legs. The dragon also had a long, thick tail, as expected. Dragons are very fierce and vindictive. Thought, Mike. It was raining heavily. Mike also used his magic, and a bright light purple light flew along the entire coast. Mike stood on the ground and watched the dragon fly. It was Jenkinson. The dragon flapped its wings several times. It was so powerful that the water in the sea scattered in different directions, almost to the very bottom. Then Mike began to watch as a seemingly ordinary fisherman on the shore began to turn into a brown dragon. This spectacle was not for the faint of heart. But Agent Mike has already seen a lot of things in his 800 years of work. Mike stood and looked at these dragons. It's been a long time since I fought dragons. Not to mention 2 dragons, said Mike. Mike was very focused on this fight. Indeed, Mike hasn't had a battle with 2 dragons at once for a long time. 2 dragons in one day, said Mike. The dragons attacked each other. Their passions were always open. They breathed and growled at each other. The battle took place in the sky. Mike stood below and held his sharp magic knife at the ready. It was raining heavily and a strong wind was blowing. This distracted and disturbed Mike. He still remained fully focused. He held his knife ready. There was loud thunder and lightning flashing in the sky. There was a terrible storm at sea. The waves reached several meters. A squally wind tore down everything in its path and carried water straight to the shore. Radio began to be broadcast in houses. News. Attention, unidentified giant typhoon. It walked along our coast and touched the entire country. The radio was broadcasting. The Korean Meteorological Service is currently investigating the causes of this crazy typhoon. Highly recommended for residents living in the surrounding area. Please review our city's disaster evacuation plan. The radio continued to transmit. Most importantly, we ask all residents to refrain from any walks around the city. At that moment, in one of the apartments, a girl was sitting on the floor and looking out the large window. She saw what a storm was happening outside and said, Taijin? There was a fitness center in one of the buildings. Mostly elves worked there. The lights were on in all the windows. The gymnastics mats were scattered throughout the hall. An elf was sitting on one of these. The elf was female. She performed complex gymnastic exercises and looked out onto the street from her large window. It was Jean Mian. She is 42 years old. She works as an elf yoga instructor at this fitness center. At the moment, she was alone in the hall. There were no clients yet. While performing her exercises, the instructor heard loud, incomprehensible sounds. The sounds were clearly coming from outside. The instructor stopped and began to listen. She felt a little creepy. Suddenly, a large black bird crashed into her window at full speed. She looked like a crow. The glass began to crack from the impact. The instructor was very scared because she had never seen anything like this before. The yoga instructor ran to her windows. She began to watch what was happening on the street. She was terrified. Oh my God, what was that yoga instructor screaming? Through the window, she saw birds circling on the street around her building. There were so many of them that it was impossible to count them. After some time, the birds began to hit the window one by one. They hit the glass with such force that it seemed like it would break, and all the birds would fly straight into her gym. The birds hit the glass and fell down. Blue and white lightning flashed in the sky above the city. It was just raining terribly hard. The squally wind blew away everything in its path. It was a real nightmare cyclone. At this moment, the sea was raging like never before. The waves reached 5 to 10 meters in height. We hit the rocks with great force. Stones fell down into the water. It was raining very heavily. Agent Mike stood on the road with his head down. He practically no longer had 2 arms. He cut them to keep his blood warm and dark magic to grow. At this moment, the large dragon turned to Mike. This dragon was simply gigantic. His green eye alone was taller and several times larger than Mike's, the dragon said. And he really is stronger than he seems. One large dragon flew across the sky above their heads. The other dragon continued to talk to Mike. To be honest, he really deserves to be called an elder dragon, the dragon said to Mike. Agent Mike looked at his hands, and there were practically none. He was bleeding, losing his blood, which meant that he was losing his strength. Something had to be done urgently. I can't screw up in front of him, said the dragon. So it's my time. I will now show him the power of a real dragon, the dragon said to Mike. 2 dragons began to fight in the sky. It was a battle for life and death. The energy and magic of dragons was all over the sky. Their rays and lightning intersected with each other. The sky was lit with fire. One dragon began to spew fire from its mouth. It was a big fire. It was very big. It seemed that everything in the path of this fire should burn and crumble into ashes. Another fire, on the contrary, began to use super magic. It emitted violet and white rays from its mouth. It was like electricity, something like a giant stun gun. Mike observed such an interesting picture. He stood on the ground and saw 2 dragons fighting in the sky above the sea. They directed beams of their energy and fire at each other. The purple beam and the fire beam met somewhere in the middle of the sky. Agent Mike also participated in this battle. He clenched his fist with all his might so that as much blood as possible flows out of his palm. The blood turned into his dark magic and energy. He must be ready to fight at any moment. Mike, bleeding, continued to control the battle and help the dragon Jenkinson. He was covered in blood. Well, his dark magic was working. She added strength and confidence to the dragons. Mike, what are you doing? Also not possible. Take care of yourself. So will you lose all your powers? Magic doesn't solve everything, but we still need you. Red beams scattered around Mike. They were everywhere. He was losing a lot of strength, but his energy was working. He couldn't stand by and just wait. He began to wave his arms vigorously. Fiery rays of light and energy were sent towards the dragon. They flew straight into the sky. He really wanted to help. Suddenly, everything became quiet. Everything around Mike became bright. It seemed to him that he could be transported to another place. Was it really a teleport? Mean Mike? Mike hadn't seen this place before. He'd never been here. He was a little scared, unusual, and he didn't understand what had happened. He ended up at a bus stop. It was light, but it was raining. The stranger was still sitting next to him. This is the place where you spend your last strength before death. Mike put his hand forward to catch the raindrops that were falling straight from the sky. What kind of place is it? Mike asked the stranger. It doesn't matter, the stranger said. It's just a bus stop. You are not a person in your body, said a stranger. No, not at all, answered Mike. Great. Then you can decide for yourself what to do with this necessary information that I will now tell you, said a stranger. Listen to me carefully and remember every word. The stranger turned to Mike. The last time the will was in the private safe of the main bank of the city. A large bus began to pull up to the stop. Stranger. He got up from the bench and walked towards the bus to leave. I really hope that you will get to know it, said a stranger. Wait. Before you leave, please answer my question. This is about your plan. Who helped you? Mike asked. I don't know them. I just accepted help from them, said a stranger. And he left. So that my virus can spread without reaching the periphery. The green bus has left. Mike remained standing at the bus stop. There was a strong, thick fog around him. He, as always, reflected and thought about what he was just told. The roof, the bloody body of the dragon, lay in the sea. The rain was stopping. The wind was no longer so strong. The cyclone was leaving and the hurricane was retreating from this city. It has been some time since there was a battle between two dragons. Another nice sunny day has arrived. The sun was shining and the weather was simply magnificent. Mike went to the flower shop. In this store you could buy everything. Flowers, seedlings, bushes, and trees. This would be a favorite flower shop. He went inside the store. The salesman met him in this store. Mike is interested in the price, what and how much it costs. There was a radio on the table of this store, which started talking again. They spoke the news. We move on to the next important news. The government explained the unusual storm that covered the entire coast of the city last week as a natural anomaly. The seller became indignant. My God, but who believes in all this nonsense? Are there really such things? The seller said loudly. It's a natural anomaly, don't make me laugh, the seller said. Mike stood nearby and was silent. Mike began to think. I expected this. It was never possible to hide the consequences of this battle with the dragons. This battle was too noticeable for all the inhabitants of this city. The autopsy was problematic. Mike remembered Jang Taijun. This was actually very important information. So, Jang Taijun revealed one big secret to Agent Mike before his death. The secret was this. He infected the body of the homunculus, which was disguised as a corpse with a virus. But the virus was actually not easy. The whole point of this is this. Magic works when it comes into contact with temperatures of 500 degrees and above. That was the whole point. Mike thought. Mike walked outside from the flower shop. He decided to catch a taxi. The lighthouse really didn't like walking. He continued to think about reflecting. And if the corpse was cremated, then the virus would have to begin to multiply. Mike continued to think. A taxi pulled up to him. Mike got in and drove off. Mike drove and continued to think. Then the virus would have to begin to multiply, and then mix with dust and spread everywhere. But this will not happen. He carried the corpse to the Immigration Bureau. They will announce the virus when they examine the body. Mike was driving to his office. It was already quite late. Evening came. Mike walked in to go up to his office. He sat down at his computer and began to work. It was necessary to reread a lot of information about what was happening, about what happened. He wrote a report on Jang Taijun on the computer. Bump. He wrote it long ago, even before he took the body to the bureau. Now I was just rereading it. A guess flashed through Mike's head. He thought it was better for him to leave the body, although he rarely relied on instinct. But 800 years of experience told him, now we need to act against our instincts. Mike continued to think. Mike thought about it. He needed to draw the right conclusions from all this. So we know. This virus only affects dragons, said Mike. But how can this be useful to me? Everything is clear. It's just the human smell that gives me away. Is Kim Youngju okay? Mike wondered. He began to remember all the events, everything he heard, and everything he was told. He remembered how he was sitting at the bus stop. He remembered not only all the words, but also the smell. What a person smelled like. Well, okay, Mike thought. She stabbed me in the back 3 times. The first time when she admitted that for several months in a row she cheated on me with a dragon. The second time was when she used drugs on me, treating me like a lab rat. And the third, when she called me greedy. Greedy for other people's goods. And one day she almost kidnapped me. At the same time, a stupid dragon. Mike continued to remember everything that the stranger at the bus stop told him. It was quite interesting. Looks like I'm the worst man in the world, since she wanted to kill me alone 3 times, the stranger concluded. Mike sat and just remembered everything verbatim. Mine continued to sit at his computer. Let's sum it up, Mike said. Chang Tai-jun intends to donate his share of shares in Hassan Industries to a charitable foundation, heir to all his property, including accounts, mutual funds, works of art, jewelry, patents, real estate, and so on. Mike continues to talk. A human woman appears who kept in touch with him until his death. Mike leaned his elbows on the chair. I started to think, that's what he's coming for, said Mike. You're just pathetic if you can't express your feelings, because nothing will matter when you're dead. It's just a fact of life. This is a simple truth and pattern for all earthly, all mortals. The girl stood on the coast. In the water on the shore lay only the hat that the dragon was wearing. She stood and was very worried about her beloved. He left me, she said. Evening was coming. The sun was setting below the horizon. It illuminated the entire sky with a red glow. It was just very beautiful. The girl raised her lover's hat. He left me forever again, she said. The girl pressed the hat that belonged to the dragon to her chest. She truly loved him. It was true love. Although I often hated him, and she even tried to kill her several times. She pressed his hat even closer to her chest. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She cried, I never stopped loving you. Tai-jun, my boss. The girl on the beach continued to cry and grieve. She sincerely regretted that her beloved was no more. Agent Mike spread the cards on the table. Damn it, why am I so unlucky? Said Mike. Weather forecast. Without rain it will be too hot. Beware of sudden storms. There is an opportunity to reunite with a person you haven't seen for a long time. Strange drought, Mike said. But it will still rain. By the way, the health forecast may also turn out to be incorrect. Mike continued talking. The night passed. The next day arrived. A beautiful red racing car came for Mike. She stood near the house and waited for him. Michael saw this car through the window. He knew who the driver was, so he hurried quickly to the exit. Katie was driving. He got into the car, and they raced along the road at top speed. The speed was just crazy. The wind blew my hair back. They drove through puddles, splashes of water flying to different countries. Their car stopped abruptly. Katie looked at Mike and said, Mike, we've arrived. We're on the spot. Come on, it's time to go out. Driving so fast made Mike feel sick and vomit. Mike struggled out of the car. Can you drive slower, Katie? I was outraged, Mike. If something doesn't suit you, then go ahead and get your license. First get them behind the wheel, and then you will point, Katya said. Katie approached the building of a large store. She smiled at Mike. Mike, today is shopping day, right? Very affectionate, Katie said kindly. Really, let's go. Mike answered her. This establishment was called the Eastern Branch Witches Corporation. Mike and Katie stood attentively, looking at the beautiful sign on the wall. They went inside. Inside, there was a very large variety of different racks and shelves. Katie was confused and didn't know where to start. Mac and Katie. Welcome, Agent Mike. These girls greeted Mike. We have been waiting for your visit to us for a long time. Mike was a little surprised. Katie was simply shocked. Mike and Katie turned around and walked away. The order you placed with us is already waiting for you, these two girls said to T-shirt. Mike and Katie hurried. Katie found a door with VIP written on it room. There was a gold-colored sign on this door. She tempted me to go inside and see what was there. Katie saw all the variety of products and was simply shocked. There's everything from premium rocks to enzymes, petrified mold, and dried brain mucus. There was snail secretion and fairy tree sap. Aren't these powerful magical catalysts? Allowing you to support spells, Katie said. Mike, please tell me if there are other similar things that you would like to buy. Or other than the ones you want to buy, Katie asked. Actually, I was thinking about something more ordinary, said Mike. Mike continued to think. I think Katie didn't even suspect to see something like that. He wondered how much fresh dragon blood he would need to defeat her. Mike walked up to the cash register. A conversation struck up with the cashier. I will help you pay for $3 billion, the cashier told Mike. I would like to entrust you with the processing of some items, said Mike. No problem, the cashier said. Walk for about 1 hour and come back. Mike went for a walk and met a man in a blue suit. This man turned to Mike. Sorry, are you by any chance Agent Mike? Said the man in the blue suit. Yes, I answered Mike. She showed Mike that he had already seen this man somewhere, but he didn't remember where. Excuse me, but who are you? Mike asked. And I'm Young Mangyu. Max remembered that this was the lawyer in the case of Jang Tai-jun. This was due to his will, and this lawyer helped him write the report. The lawyer handed the t-shirt his business card. Sorry, I couldn't give you much time then because my schedule was too full, the lawyer said. Well, since fate has brought us here, I suggest we sit together and chat. The lawyer and Mike sat down on a chair at the table. They began to communicate. So, you're an Immigration Bureau agent, is that right? The lawyer asked Mike. Yes, this is absolutely true, said Mike. Tell me, please, don't you do private orders, Mike? The lawyer was very confident in his request. But Mike, on the contrary, was shocked by this question. Mike even leaned back a little in his chair in shock, but there were very surprised eyes. Sorry, but if this is not some special case, then I will have to refuse you. Sorry, said Mike. The lawyer was a little embarrassed. Oh, sorry, I didn't actually know about that, the lawyer said. You know, Mike, there is one problem, but it's not mine. It's my client's problem, the lawyer said. I completely forgot to say, I have one more thing to do on the 3rd floor. Therefore, I am forced to leave you and go to the 3rd floor. The lawyer handed the t-shirt his personal business card. Mike, but if you still change your mind, then be sure to call me. I will be very much looking forward to your call. Be sure to contact me, the lawyer said.